All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started tonight, shall we? Welcome back. This is our fourth night of reading from Alexandre Dumas's The Three Musketeers. As always, we are just getting settled, getting comfy, and getting ready to see where tonight's book is going to take us. In the last few nights, we've seen... yes, Z got to me. So, Simba has been getting quite a bit larger. As such, it felt appropriate to upscale his representation on stream to be about the same size as Zoe, because he's really about as big as she is. But there's a certain quirk to this cat. I swear on everything that is holy. This cat is never right side up when I go to take a picture. So, we've got Zoe, floofy cloud of a ragdoll cat, and we've got Simba, an upside down floofy cloud of a ragdoll cat. Felt appropriate. So, as we were saying, our titular trio, as well as D'Artagnan, have been getting up to their adventures, bumbling their way through and somehow finding themselves in the thick of palace intrigue. Finding the visiting Duke of Buckingham on his way in to an illicit visit with the Queen. And we've left with poor Athos still imprisoned for, presumably, D'Artagnan's crimes of ousting those that were waiting for D'Artagnan's landlord to come home. So, and we've also left the poor landlord in the lurch. So we'll see whether there's any gallant jailbreaks or more diplomatic ends to captivity, as well as how our quartet is going to navigate their way through these thickening plots. Because we know for certain they are three of the least qualified people to be involved in this, and as such, they will be the most involved. It's law. It has to happen that way. So, let's go ahead and jump into it tonight and see how things start to play out. Chapter 13. Monsieur Bonacieux. There was in all this, as may have been observed, one personage concerned, of whom, notwithstanding his precarious position, we have appeared to take but very little notice. This personage was Monsieur Bonacieux, the respectable martyr of the political and amorous intrigues which entangled themselves so nicely together at this gallant and chivalric period. Okay, so it seems Dumas also realizes that he's left someone in the lurch. Good to know the author and I are on the same wavelength. Fortunately, the reader may remember, or may not remember. Fortunately, we have promised not to lose sight of him. Good on you, Alexandre. The officers who arrested him conducted him straight to the Bastille, where he passed trembling before a party of soldiers who were loading their muskets. Thence, introduced into a half-subterranean gallery, he became, on the part of those who had brought him, the object of their grossest insults and the harshest treatment. The officers perceived that they had not to deal with a gentleman, and they treated him like a very peasant. At the end of half an hour or thereabouts, a clerk came to put an end to his tortures, but not to his anxiety, by giving the order to conduct Monsieur Bonacieux to the chamber of examination. That is, capitalized, the chamber, big C, of examination, big E. That's slightly ominous there. Ordinarily, prisoners were interrogated in their cells, but they did not do so with Monsieur Bonacieux. 2 guards attended the mercer, who made him traverse a court and enter a corridor, in which were 3 sentinels, opened a door, and pushed him unceremoniously into a low room, where the only furniture was a table, a chair, and a commissary. The commissary was seated in the chair and was writing at the table. The two guards led the prisoner toward the table, and upon a sign from the commissary drew back so far as to be unable to hear anything. The commissary, who had till this time held his head down and over his papers, looked up to see what sort of person he had to do with. This commissary was a man of very repulsive mien, with a pointed nose, with yellow and salient cheekbones, with eyes small but keen and penetrating, and an expression of countenance resembling at once the polecat and the fox. His head, supported by a long and flexible neck, issued from his large black robe, balancing itself with a motion very much like that of the tortoise, thrusting his head out of his shell. He began by asking Monsieur Bonacieux his name, age, condition, and abode. The accused replied that his name was Jacques Michel Bonacieux, that he was 51 years old, a retired mercer, and lived in Rue de Fossoyeurs, number 14. The commissary then, instead of continuing to interrogate him, made him a long speech upon the danger there is for an obscure citizen to meddle with public matters. He complicated this exordium by an exposition in which he painted the power and the deeds of the cardinal, that incomparable minister, that conqueror of past ministers, that example for ministers to come, deeds and power which none could thwart with impunity. After this second part of his discourse, fixing his hawk's eye upon poor Bonacieux, he bade him reflect upon the gravity of his situation. The reflections of the mercer were already made. He cursed the instant when Monsieur Laporte formed the idea of marrying him to his goddaughter, and particularly the moment when that goddaughter had been received as Lady of the Linen to Her Majesty. At the bottom of the character of Monsieur Bonacieux was one of profound selfishness, mixed with sordid avarice, the whole seasoned with extreme cowardice. The love with which his young wife had inspired him was a secondary sentiment, and was not strong enough to contend with the primitive feelings that we have just enumerated. Bonacieux indeed reflected on what had just been said to him. "But, Monsieur Commissary," he said calmly, "believe that I know and appreciate, more than anybody, the merit of the incomparable eminence by whom we have the honor to be governed." "Indeed?" asked the commissary, with an air of doubt. "If that is really so, how came you in the Bastille?" "How I came there, or rather why I am there," replied Bonacieux, "that is entirely impossible for me to tell you, because I don't know myself. But to a certainty, it is not for having, knowingly at least, disobliged Monsieur the Cardinal." "You must, nevertheless, have committed a crime, since you are here and are accused of high treason." "Of high treason!" cried Bonacieux, terrified. "Of high treason! How is it possible for a poor mercer, who detests Huguenots and who abhors Spaniards, to be accused of high treason? Consider, monsieur, the thing is absolutely impossible." "Monsieur Bonacieux," said the commissary, looking at the accused as if his little eyes had the faculty of reading to the very depths of hearts, "you have a wife." "Yes, monsieur," replied the mercer in a tremble, feeling that it was at this point affairs were likely to become perplexing. "That is to say, I had one." "What? You had one? What have you done with her, then, if you have her no longer?" "They have abducted her, monsieur." "They have abducted her?" Bonacieux inferred from this that the affair grew more and more intricate. "They have abducted her," added the commissary. "And do you know the man who has committed this deed?" "I think I know him. Who is he? Remember that I affirm nothing, monsieur the commissary, and that I only suspect." "Whom do you suspect? Come, answer freely." Monsieur Bonacieux was in the greatest perplexity possible. Had he better deny everything or tell everything? By denying all, it might be suspected that he must know too much to avow. By confessing all, he might prove his goodwill. He decided then to tell all. I suspect, said he, a tall, dark man, of lofty carriage, who has the air of a great lord. He has followed us several times, as I think, when I have waited for my wife at the wicket of the Louvre to escort her home. The commissary now appeared to experience a little uneasiness. And his name, said he. Oh, as to his name, I know nothing about it. But if I were ever to meet him, I should recognize him in an instant. I will answer for it, were he among 1,000 persons. The face of the commissary grew still darker. You should recognize him among 1,000, say you, continued he. That is to say, cried Bonacieux, who saw he had taken a false step. That is to say... You have answered that you should recognize him, said the commissary. That is all very well, and enough for today. Before we proceed further, someone must be informed that you know the ravisher of your wife. But I have not told you that I know him, cried Bonacieux in despair. I told you, on the contrary. Take away the prisoner, said the commissary to the 2 guards. Where must we place him? In a dungeon. Which? Good Lord, in the first one handy, provided it is safe, said the commissary, with an indifference which penetrated poor Bonacieux with horror. Alas, alas, said he to himself, misfortune is over my head. My wife must have committed some frightful crime. They believe me her accomplice, and will punish me with her. She must have spoken. She must have confessed everything. A woman is so weak. A dungeon! The first he comes to? That's it. A night is soon past, and tomorrow to the wheel, to the gallows. Oh, my God, have pity on me. Without listening the least in the world to the lamentations of Monsieur Bonacieux, lamentations to which, besides, they must have been pretty well accustomed, the 2 guards took the prisoner each by an arm, and led him away, while the commissary wrote a letter in haste, and dispatched it by an officer in waiting. Bonacieux could not close his eyes, not because his dungeon was so very disagreeable, but because his uneasiness was so great. He sat all night on his stool, starting at the least noise, and when the first rays of the sun penetrated into his chamber, the dawn itself appeared to him to have taken funereal tints. All at once, he heard his bolts drawn, and made a terrified bound. He believed they were come to conduct him to the scaffold, so that when he saw merely and simply, instead of the executioner he expected, only his commissary of the preceding evening, attended by his clerk, he was ready to embrace them both. Your affair has become more complicated since yesterday evening, my good man, and I advise you to tell the whole truth, for your repentance alone can remove the anger of the cardinal. Why, I am ready to tell everything, cried Bonacieux, at least all that I know. Interrogate me, I entreat you. Where is your wife, in the first place? Why, did I not tell you she has been stolen from me? Yes, but yesterday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, thanks to you, she escaped. My wife escaped, cried Bonacieux. Oh, unfortunate creature. Monsieur, if she has escaped, it is not my fault, I swear. What business had you, then, to go into the chamber of Monsieur d'Artagnan, your neighbor, with whom you had a long conference during the day? Ah, yes, Monsieur Commissary, that is true, and I confess that I was in the wrong. I did go to Monsieur d'Artagnan's. What was the aim of that visit? To beg him to assist me in finding my wife. I believed I had a right to endeavor to find her. I was deceived, as it appears, and I ask your pardon. And what did Monsieur d'Artagnan reply? Monsieur d'Artagnan promised me his assistance, but I soon found out that he was betraying me. You impose upon justice. Monsieur d'Artagnan made a compact with you, and in virtue of that compact, put to flight the police who had arrested your wife, and has placed her beyond reach. Monsieur d'Artagnan has abducted my wife? Come now, what are you telling me? Fortunately, Monsieur d'Artagnan is in our hands, and you shall be confronted with him. By my faith, I ask no better, cried Bonacieux. I shall not be sorry to see the face of an acquaintance. Bring in the Monsieur d'Artagnan, said the commissary to the guards. The 2 guards led in Athos. Monsieur d'Artagnan, said the commissary, addressing Athos, declare all that passed yesterday between you and Monsieur. But, cried Bonacieux, this is not Monsieur d'Artagnan, whom you show me." "What? Not Monsieur d'Artagnan?" exclaimed the commissary. "Not the least in the world," replied Bonacieux. "What is this gentleman's name?" asked the commissary. "I cannot tell you. I don't know him." "How? You don't know him?" "No. Did you never see him?" "Yes, I have seen him, but I don't know what he calls himself." "Your name?" replied the commissary. "Athos," replied the musketeer. "But that is not a man's name. That is the name of a mountain," cried the poor questioner, who began to lose his head. "That is my name," said Athos quietly. "But you said your name was D'Artagnan." "Who? I? Yes, you. Somebody said to me, 'You are Monsieur d'Artagnan?' I answered, 'You think so?' My guards exclaimed that they were sure of it. I did not wish to contradict them. Besides, I might be deceived." "Monsieur, you insult the majesty of justice." "Not at all," said Athos calmly. "You are Monsieur d'Artagnan. You see, monsieur, that you say it again." "But I tell you, Monsieur Commissary," cried Bonacieux in his turn, "there is not the least doubt about the matter. Monsieur d'Artagnan is my tenant, although he does not pay me my rent. And even better on that account ought I to know him. Monsieur d'Artagnan is a young man, scarcely 19 or 20, and this gentleman must be 30 at least. Monsieur d'Artagnan is in Monsieur Dessessart's guards, and this gentleman is in the company of Monsieur de Tréville's musketeers. Look at his uniform, Monsieur Commissary. Look at his uniform." "That's true," murmured the commissary. "Pardieu, that's true." At this moment, the door was opened quickly, and a messenger, introduced by one of the gatekeepers of the Bastille, gave a letter to the commissary. "Oh, unhappy woman!" cried the commissary. "How? What do you say? Of whom do you speak? It is not my wife, I hope." "On the contrary, it is of her. Yours is a pretty business." "What?" said the agitated mercer. "Do me the pleasure, monsieur, to tell me how my own proper affair can become worse by anything my wife does while I am in prison." "Because that which she does is part of a plan concerted between you, of an infernal plan. I swear to you, Monsieur Commissary, that you are in the profoundest error, that I know nothing in the world about what my wife had to do, that I am entirely a stranger to what she's done, and that if she has committed any follies, I renounce her, I abjure her, I curse her." "Bah!" said Athos to the commissary, "if you have no more need of me, send me somewhere. Your Monsieur Bonacieux is very tiresome." The commissary designated by the same gesture Athos and Bonacieux. "Let them be guarded more closely than ever." "And yet," said Athos with his habitual calmness, "if it be Monsieur d'Artagnan who is concerned in this matter, I do not perceive how I can take his place." "Do as I bade you," cried the commissary, "and preserve absolute secrecy. You understand?" Athos shrugged his shoulders and followed his guards silently, while Monsieur Bonacieux uttered lamentations enough to break the heart of a tiger. They locked the mercer in the same dungeon where he had passed the night, and left him to himself during the day. Bonacieux wept all day like a true mercer, not being at all a military man, as he himself informed us. In the evening, about 9 o'clock, at the moment he had made up his mind to go to bed, he heard steps in his corridor. These steps drew near to his dungeon. The door was thrown open, and the guards appeared. "Follow me," said an officer, who came up behind the guards. "Follow you?" cried Bonacieux. "Follow you at this hour? Where, my God?" "Where we have orders to lead you. But that is not an answer. It is, nevertheless, the only one we can give." "Oh, my God," murmured the poor mercer. "Now, indeed, I am lost." And he followed the guards, who came for him mechanically and without resistance. He passed along the same corridor as before, crossed one court, then a second side of a building. At length, at the gate of the entrance court, he found a carriage surrounded by 4 guards on horseback. They made him enter this carriage. The officer placed himself by his side. The door was locked, and they were left in a rolling prison. The carriage was put in motion as slowly as a funeral car. Through the closely fastened windows, the prisoner could perceive the houses and the pavement. That was all. But true Parisian as he was, Bonacieux could recognize every street by the milestones, the signs, and the lamps. At the moment of arriving at St. Paul, the spot where such as were condemned at the Bastille were executed. He was near fainting, and crossed himself twice. He thought the carriage was about to stop there. The carriage, however, passed on. Farther on, a still greater terror seized him on passing by the cemetery of Saint Jean, where state criminals were buried. One thing, however, reassured him. He remembered that before they were buried, their heads were generally cut off, and he felt that his head was still on his shoulders. But when he saw the carriage take the way to Le Grave, when he perceived the pointed roof of the Hôtel de Ville, and the carriage passed under the arcade, he believed it was over with him. He wished to confess to the officer, and upon his refusal uttered such pitiable cries that the officer told him that if he continued to deafen him thus, he should put a gag in his mouth. This measure somewhat reassured Bonacieux. If they meant to execute him at Le Grave, it could scarcely be worthwhile to gag him, as they had nearly reached the place of execution. Indeed, the carriage crossed the fatal spot without stopping. There remained, then, no other place to fear but the Traitor's Cross. The carriage was taking the direct road to it. This time there was no longer any doubt. It was at the Traitor's Cross that lesser criminals were executed. Bonacieux had flattered himself in believing himself worthy of St. Paul or of the Place de Grève. But it was at the Traitor's Cross that his journey and his destiny were about to end. He could not yet see that dreadful cross, but he felt somehow as if it were coming to meet him. He was within 20 paces of it. He heard a noise of people, and the carriage stopped. This was more than poor Bonacieux could endure. Depressed as he was by the successive emotions which he had experienced, he uttered a feeble groan, which might have been taken for the last sigh of a dying man, and fainted. That brings us to the end of chapter 13, and poor Bonacieux is left unknown. He's had a bad couple of days, let's be real. And then Athos is just, stoking the fires a little bit. Alright. Let's see here. Let us continue now with chapter 14, The Man of Meung. The crowd was caused, not by the expectation of a man to be hanged, but by the contemplation of a man who was hanged. The carriage, which had been stopped for a minute, resumed its way, passed through the crowd, threaded the Rue Saint-Honore, turned into the Rue des Bons Enfants, and stopped before a low door. The door opened. 2 guards received Bonacieux in their arms from the officer who supported him. They carried him through an alley, up a flight of stairs, and deposited him in an antechamber. All these movements had been effected mechanically, as far as he was concerned. He had walked as one walks in a dream. He had a glimpse of objects as through a fog. His ears had perceived sounds without comprehending them. He might have been executed at that moment without his making a single gesture in his own defense or uttering a cry to implore mercy. He remained on the bench, with his back leaning against the wall and his hands hanging down, exactly on the spot where the guards placed him. On looking around him, however, as he could perceive no threatening object, as nothing indicated that he ran any real danger, as the bench was comfortably covered with a well-stuffed cushion, as the wall was ornamented with a beautiful Cordova leather, and as large red damask curtains, fastened back by gold clasps, floated before the window, he perceived by degrees that his fear was exaggerated. And as he began to turn his head to the right and the left, upward and downward, at this movement, which nobody opposed, he resumed a little courage, and ventured to draw up one leg and then the other. At length, with the help of his 2 hands, he lifted himself from the bench, and found himself on his feet. At this moment, an officer with a pleasant face opened a door, continued to exchange some words with the person in the next chamber, and then came up to the prisoner. "Is your name Bonacieux?" said he. "Yes, monsieur officer," stammered the mercer, more dead than alive. "At your service." "Come in," said the officer. And he moved out of the way to let the mercer pass. The latter obeyed without reply, and entered the chamber, where he appeared to be expected. It was a large cabinet, close and stifling, with the walls furnished with arms offensive and defensive, and in which there was already a fire, although it was scarcely the end of the month of September. A square table covered with books and papers, upon which was unrolled an immense plan of the city of La Rochelle, occupied the center of the room. Standing before the chimney was a man of middle height, of a haughty, proud mien, with piercing eyes, a large brow, and a thin face, which was made still longer by a royal, or imperial, as it is now called, surmounted by a pair of moustaches. Although this man was scarcely 36 or 37 years of age, hair, moustaches, and royal all began to be gray. This man, except a sword, had all the appearance of a soldier, and his buff boots, still slightly covered with dust, indicated that he had been on horseback in the course of the day. This man was Armand Jean Duplessis, Cardinal de Richelieu, not such as he is now represented, broken down like an old man, suffering like a martyr, his body bent, his voice failing, buried in a large armchair as in an anticipated tomb, no longer living, but by the strength of his genius, and no longer maintaining the struggle with Europe, but by the eternal application of his thoughts, but such as he really was at this period. That is to say, an active and gallant cavalier, already weak of body, but sustained by that moral power which made of him one of the most extraordinary men that ever lived. Preparing, after having supported the Duc de Nevers in his Duchy of Mantua, after having taken Nimes, Castres, and Uzes, to drive the English from the Isle of Ré and lay siege to La Rochelle. At first sight, nothing denoted the cardinal, and it was impossible for those who did not know his face to guess in whose presence they were. The poor mercer remained standing at the door, while the eyes of the personage we have just described were fixed upon him, and appeared to wish to penetrate even into the depths of the past. "Is this that Bonacieux?" asked he, after a moment of silence. "Yes, Monseigneur." "That's well. Give me those papers, and leave us." The officer took from the table the papers pointed out, gave them to him who asked for them, bowed to the ground, and retired. Bonacieux recognized in these papers his interrogatories of the Bastille. From time to time, the man by the chimney raised his eyes from the writings, and plunged them like poniards into the heart of the poor mercer. At the end of 10 minutes of reading, and 10 seconds of examination, the cardinal was satisfied. "That head has never conspired," murmured he, "but it matters not. We will see." "You are accused of high treason," said the cardinal slowly. "So I have been told already, Monseigneur," cried Bonacieux, giving his interrogator the title he had heard the officer give him. "But I swear to you that I know nothing about it." The cardinal repressed a smile. "You have conspired with your wife, with Madame de Chevreuse, and with my Lord Duke of Buckingham." "Indeed, Monseigneur," responded the mercer, "I have heard her pronounce all those names." "And on what occasion?" "She said that the Cardinal de Richelieu had drawn the Duke of Buckingham to Paris to ruin him, and to ruin the Queen." "She said that?" cried the cardinal with violence. "Yes, Monseigneur, but I told her she was wrong to talk about such things, and that his eminence was incapable." "Hold your tongue! You are stupid," replied the cardinal. "That's exactly what my wife said, Monseigneur." "Do you know who carried off your wife?" "No, Monseigneur." "You have suspicions, nevertheless." "Yes, Monseigneur. But these suspicions appeared to be disagreeable to Monsieur the Commissary, and I no longer have them." "Your wife has escaped. Did you know that?" "No, Monsieur. I learned it since I had been in prison, and that from the conversation of Monsieur the Commissary, an amiable man." The cardinal repressed another smile. "Then you are ignorant of what has become of your wife since her flight? Absolutely, Monseigneur. But she has most likely returned to the Louvre. At 1 o'clock this morning, she had not returned. My God! What can have become of her then? We shall know. Be assured, nothing is concealed from the Cardinal. The Cardinal knows everything. In that case, Monseigneur, do you believe the Cardinal will be so kind as to tell me what has become of my wife? Perhaps he may, but you must, in the first place, reveal to the Cardinal all you know of your wife's relations with Madame de Chevreuse. But, Monsieur, I know nothing about them. I have never seen her. When you went to fetch your wife from the Louvre, did you always return directly home? Scarcely ever. She had business to transact with linen drapers, to whose houses I conducted her. And how many were there of these linen drapers? 2, Monseigneur. And where do they live? One in Rue de Vaugirard, and the other in Rue de la Harpe. Did you go into these houses with her? Never, Monsieur. I waited at the door. And what excuse did she give you for entering all alone? She gave me none. She told me to wait, and I waited. You are a very complacent husband, my dear Monsieur Bonacieux, said the Cardinal. He calls me his dear Monsieur. Dear Monsieur, said the mercer to himself. Peste, matters are going all right. Should you know those doors again? Yes. Do you know the numbers? Yes. What are they? Number 25 in the Rue de Vaugirard, and 75 in the Rue de la Harpe. That's well, said the Cardinal. At these words he took up a silver bell and rang it. The officer returned. Go, said he in a subdued voice, and find Rochefort. Tell him to come to me immediately, if he has returned. The Count is here, said the officer, and requests to speak with your Eminence instantly. Let him come in, then, said the Cardinal quickly. The officer sprang out of the apartment with the alacrity which all the servants of the Cardinal displayed in obeying him. Your Eminence, murmured Bonacieux, rolling his eyes round in astonishment. 5 seconds had scarcely elapsed after the disappearance of the officer when the door opened, and a new personage entered. It is he! Cried Bonacieux. He? What he? The man who abducted my wife! The Cardinal rang a second time. The officer reappeared. Place this man in the care of his guards again, and let him wait till I send for him. No, Monseigneur, no, it is not he, cried Bonacieux. No, I was deceived. That's quite another man, and does not resemble him at all. Monsieur, I am sure an honest man. Take away that fool, said the Cardinal. The officer took Bonacieux by the arm, and led him into the antechamber, where he found his 2 guards. The newly introduced personage followed Bonacieux impatiently with his eyes, till he had gone out, and the moment the door closed, They have seen each other, said he, approaching the Cardinal eagerly. Who? Asked his Eminence. He and she. The Queen and the Duke, cried Richelieu. Yes. Where? At the Louvre. Are you sure of it? Perfectly sure. Who told you of it? Madame de Lannoy, who is devoted to your Eminence, as you know. Why did she not let me know sooner? Whether by chance or mistrust, the Queen made Madame de Surges sleep in her chamber, and detained her all day. Well, we are beaten. Now, let us try to take our revenge. I will assist you with all my heart, Monseigneur. Be assured of that. How did it come about? At 12:30, the Queen was with her women. Where? In her bedchamber. Go on. When someone came and brought her a handkerchief from her laundress. And then the Queen immediately exhibited strong emotion, and despite the rouge with which her face was covered, evidently turned pale. And then... She then arose, and with altered voice, Ladies, said she, wait for me 10 minutes. I shall soon return. She then opened the door of her alcove and went out. Why did not Madame de Lannoy come and inform you instantly? Nothing was certain. Besides, Her Majesty had said, Ladies, wait for me, and she did not dare disobey the Queen. How long did the Queen remain out of the chamber? 3/4 of an hour. None of her women accompanied her. Only Donna Estefania. Did she return afterward? Yes, but only to take a little rosewood casket with her cipher upon it, and went out again immediately. And when she finally returned, did she bring that casket with her? No. Does Madame de Lannoy know what was in that casket? Yes, the diamond studs which His Majesty gave the Queen. And she came back without this casket. Yes, Madame de Lannoy, then, is of opinion that she gave them to Buckingham. She is sure of it. How can she be so? In the course of the day, Madame de Lannoy, in her quality of tirewoman of the Queen, looked for this casket, appeared uneasy at not finding it, and at length asked information of the Queen. And then the Queen became exceedingly red, and replied that, having in the evening broken one of those studs, she had sent it to her goldsmith to be repaired. He must be called upon, and so ascertain if the thing be true or not. I have just been with him, and the goldsmith has heard nothing of it. Well, well, Rochefort, all is not lost, and perhaps, everything is for the best. The fact is that I do not doubt your Eminence's genius will repair the blunders of his agent. Is that it? That is exactly what I was going to say, if your Eminence had let me finish my sentence. Meanwhile, do you know where the Duchess de Chevreuse and the Duke of Buckingham are now concealed? No, Monseigneur. My people could tell me nothing on that head. But I know. Yeah, you, Monseigneur? Yes, or at the least, I guess. They were in one of the Rue de Vaugirard, number 25, the other in the Rue de la Harpe, number 75. Does your Eminence command that they both be instantly arrested? It will be too late. They will be gone. But still, we can make sure that they are so. Take 10 of my guardsmen, and search the two houses thoroughly. Instantly, Monseigneur, and Rochefort went hastily out of the apartment. The cardinal, being left alone, reflected for an instant, and then rang the bell a third time. The same officer appeared. Bring the prisoner in again, said the cardinal. Monsieur Bonacieux was introduced afresh, and upon a sign from the cardinal, the officer retired. You have deceived me, said the cardinal sternly. I deceived your Eminence. Your wife, in going to Rue de Vaugirard and Rue de la Harpe, did not go to find linen drapers. Then why did she go? Just God? She went to meet the Duchess de Chevreuse and the Duke of Buckingham. Yes, cried Bonacieux, recalling all his remembrance of the circumstances. Yes, that's it. Your Eminence is right. I told my wife several times that it was surprising that linen drapers should live in such houses as those, in houses that had no signs, but she always laughed at me. Ah, Monseigneur, continued Bonacieux, throwing himself at his Eminence's feet. Ah, how truly you are the cardinal, the great cardinal, the man of genius whom all the world reveres. The cardinal, however, contemptible might be the triumph gained over so vulgar a being as Bonacieux, did not the less enjoy it for an instant then. Then, almost immediately, as if a fresh thought had occurred, a smile played upon his lips, and he said, offering his hand to the mercer, Rise, my friend. You are a worthy man. The cardinal has touched me with his hand. I have touched the hand of the great man, cried Bonacieux. The great man has called me his friend. Yes, my friend, yes, said the cardinal, with that paternal tone which he sometimes knew how to assume, but which deceived none who knew him. And, as you have been unjustly suspected, well, you must be indemnified. Here, take this purse of 100 pistoles, and pardon me. I pardon you, monsieur, said Bonacieux, hesitating to take the purse, fearing, doubtless, that this pretended gift was but a pleasantry. But you were able to have me arrested. You were able to have me tortured. You were able to have me hanged. You are the master, and I could not have the least word to say. Pardon you, Monseigneur. You cannot mean that. Ah, my dear Monsieur Bonacieux, you are generous in this matter. I see it, and I thank you for it. Thus, then, you will take this bag, and you will go away without being too malcontent. I go away enchanted. Farewell, then, or rather, au revoir, for I hope we shall meet again. Whenever Monsieur wishes, I am always at his Eminence's orders. That will be frequently, I assure you, for I have found something extremely agreeable in your conversation. Oh, Monseigneur! Au revoir, Monsieur Bonacieux. Au revoir. And the cardinal made him a sign with his hands, to which Bonacieux replied by bowing to the ground. He then went out backward, and when he was in the antechamber, the cardinal heard him, in his enthusiasm, crying aloud, "Long life to the Monseigneur! Long life to his eminence! Long life to the great cardinal!" The cardinal listened with a smile to this vociferous manifestation of the feelings of Monsieur Bonacieux, and then, when Bonacieux's cries were no longer audible, "Good," said he, "that man would henceforward lay down his life for me." And the cardinal began to examine with the greatest attention the map of La Rochelle, which, as we have said, lay open on the desk, tracing with a pencil the line in which the famous dike was to pass, which, 18 months later, shut up the port of the besieged city. As he was in the deepest of his strategic meditations, the door opened, and Rochefort returned. "Well," said the cardinal eagerly, rising with a promptitude which proved the degree of importance he attached to the commission with which he had charged the count. "Well," said the latter, "a young man of about 26 or 28 years of age, and a man of whom 35 to 40 have indeed lodged at the two houses pointed out by your eminence, but the woman left last night, and the man this morning." "It was they!" cried the cardinal, looking at the clock, "and now it is too late to have them pursued. The Duchess is at Toul, and the Duke at Boulogne. It is in London they must be found. What are your eminence's orders? Not a word of what has passed. Let the Queen remain in perfect security. Let her be ignorant that we know her secret. Let her believe that we are in search of some conspiracy or other. Send me the keeper of the seals, Seguier." "And that man, what has your eminence done with him?" "What man?" asked the cardinal. "That Bonacieux. I have done with him all that could be done. I have made him a spy upon his wife." The Comte de Rochefort bowed like a man who acknowledges the superiority of the master as great, and retired. Left alone, the cardinal seated himself again and wrote a letter, which he secured with his special seal. Then he rang. The officer entered for the fourth time. "Tell Vitre to come to me," said he, "and tell him to get ready for a journey." An instant later, the man he asked for was before him, booted and spurred. "Vitre," he said, "you will go with all speed to London. You must not stop an instant on the way. You will deliver this letter to Milady. Here is an order for 200 pistoles. Call upon my treasurer and get the money. You shall have as much again if you are back within 6 days, and have executed your commission well." The messenger, without replying a single word, bowed, took the letter, and with the order for the 200 pistoles, retired. Here is what that letter contained. "Milady, be at the first ball at which the Duke of Buckingham shall be present. He will wear on his doublet 12 diamond studs. Get as near to him as you can, and cut off 2. As soon as these studs shall be in your possession, inform me." That brings us to the end of chapter 14. And so Bonacieux was in way, way, way over his head. And so a little bit of dungeon time, a little bit of light interrogation. Didn't even get tortured or anything. Just, led around, let his own imagination do all the worries and wonder. And then throw him in front of one of the 2 most important men in France. And he crumbled like a gingerbread house. Just fell to pieces. A little bit of a hope dangled before him, and he gripped onto that as tightly as he could. And so, the cardinal has a new man. D'Artagnan's own landlord. I'm sure that will come back around and be significant later on. There's no way that it will not. All right. We should probably have enough time to get through another chapter before we take a quick break. So let's continue and see what will become of the next bit of story in this twisted tapestry that we're putting together so far. And so, chapter 15. Men of the Robe and Men of the Sword. On the day after these events had taken place, Athos not having reappeared, Monsieur de Tréville was informed by D'Artagnan and Porthos of the circumstance. As to Aramis, he had asked for leave of absence for 5 days, and was gone, it was said, to Rouen on family business. Monsieur de Tréville was the father of his soldiers, the lowest or the least known of them. As soon as he assumed the uniform of the company, was as sure of his aid and support as if he had been his own brother. He repaired then instantly to the office of the lieutenant criminel. The officer who commanded the post of the Red Cross was sent for, and by successive inquiries they learned that Athos was then lodged in Fort l'Evêque. L'Evêque? Fort l'Evêque. That's straining my tenuous grasp of French. Let's see if this. Nah, no definition found. I actually have to look this up because it's gonna bother me. Give me a pronunciation, please. Please, please, please. No. Nope, nope, nope. It is a mountain. I know that. It's a mountain. And there's no easily given pronunciation there. So, Liverquay. Hopefully it won't come up too terribly often. We'll see. Athos had passed through all the examinations we have seen Bonacieux undergo. We were present at the scene in which the two captives were confronted with each other. Athos, who had till that time said nothing for fear that D'Artagnan, interrupted in his turn, should not have the time necessary, from this moment declared that his name was Athos and not D'Artagnan. He added that he did not know either Monsieur or Madame Bonacieux, that he had never spoken to the one or the other, that he had come at about 10 o'clock in the evening to pay a visit to his friend Monsieur d'Artagnan, but that till that hour he had been at Monsieur de Tréville's, where he had dined 20 witnesses, and that he could attest to the fact. And he named several distinguished gentlemen, and among them was Monsieur le Duc de la Trémouille. The second commissary was as much bewildered as the first had been by the simple and firm declaration of the musketeer, upon whom he was anxious to take the revenge which men of the robe like at all times to gain over men of the sword. But the name of Monsieur de Tréville and that of Monsieur de la Trémouille commanded a little reflection. Athos was then sent to the cardinal, but unfortunately the cardinal was at the Louvre with the king. It was precisely at this moment that Monsieur de Tréville, on leaving the residence of the lieutenant criminel and the governor of La Fort l'Evêque, without being able to find Athos, arrived at the palace. As captain of the musketeers, Monsieur de Tréville had the right of entry at all times. It is well known how violent the king's prejudices were against the queen, and how carefully these prejudices were kept up by the cardinal, who, in affairs of intrigue, mistrusted women infinitely more than men. One of the grand causes of this prejudice was the friendship of Anne of Austria for Madame de Chevreuse. These two women gave him more uneasiness than the war with Spain, the quarrel with England, or the embarrassment of the finances. In his eyes, and to his conviction, Madame de Chevreuse not only served the queen in her political intrigues, but what tormented him still more in her amorous intrigues. At the first word, the cardinal spoke of Madame de Chevreuse, who, though exiled to Tours and believed to be in that city, had come to Paris, remained there 5 days, and outwitted the police. The king flew into a furious passion. Capricious and unfaithful, the king wished to be called Louis the Just and Louis the Chaste. Posterity will find a difficulty in understanding this character, which history explains only by facts and never by reason. L'Evêque? That makes sense. Let's go with that. But when the cardinal added that not only Madame de Chevreuse had been in Paris, but still further, that the queen had renewed with her one of those mysterious correspondences, which, at that time, was named a cabal, when he affirmed that he, the cardinal, was about to unravel the most closely twisted thread of this intrigue, that at the moment of arresting in the very act, with all the proofs about her, the queen's emissary to the exiled duchess, a musketeer had dared to interrupt the course of justice violently by falling sword in hand upon the honest men of the law, charged with investigating impartially the whole affair in order to place it before the eyes of the king, Louis XIII. Could not contain himself, and he made a step toward the queen's apartment with that pale and mute indignation which, when it broke out, led this prince to the commission of the most pitiless cruelty. And yet, in all this, the cardinal had not yet said a word about the Duke of Buckingham. At this instant, Monsieur de Treville entered, cool, polite, and in irreproachable costume. Informed of what had passed by the presence of the cardinal and the alteration of the king's countenance, Monsieur de Treville felt himself something like Samson before the Philistines. Louis XIII had already placed his hand on the knob of the door. At the noise of Monsieur de Treville's entrance, he turned round. "You arrive in good time, monsieur," said the king, who, when his passions were raised to a certain point, could not dissemble. "I have learned some fine things concerning your musketeers." "And I," said Treville coldly, "I have some pretty things to tell your majesty concerning these gownsmen." "What?" said the king with hauteur. "I have the honor to inform your majesty," continued Monsieur de Treville, in the same tone, "that a party of procurors, commissaries, and men of the police, very estimable people, but very inveterate, as it appears, against the uniform, have taken upon themselves to arrest in a house, to lead away through the open street, and throw into Fort l'Evêque, all upon an order which they have refused to show me, one of my, or rather your, musketeers, sire, of irreproachable conduct, of an almost illustrious reputation, and whom your majesty knows favorably, Monsieur Athos." "Athos?" said the king mechanically. "Yes, certainly I know that name." "Let your majesty remember," said Treville, "that Monsieur Athos is the musketeer who, in the annoying duel which you are acquainted with, had the misfortune to wound Monsieur de Cahusac so seriously. "A propos, monsieur," considered Treville, addressing the cardinal, "Monsieur de Cahusac is quite recovered, is he not?" "Thank you," said the cardinal, biting his lips with anger. "Athos, then, went to pay a visit to one of his friends, absent at the time," continued Treville, "to a young Bernet, a cadet in his majesty's guards, the company of Monsieur Dessart. But scarcely had he arrived at his friend's and taken up a book while waiting his return, when a mixed crowd of bailiffs and soldiers came and laid siege to the house, broke open several doors." The cardinal made the king a sign which signified that was on account of the affair about which I spoke to you. "We all know that," interrupted the king, "for all that was done for our service." "Then," said Treville, "it was also for your majesty's service that one of my musketeers, who was innocent, has been seized, that he has been placed between two guards like a malefactor, and that this gallant man, who has 10 times shed his blood in your majesty's service, and is ready to shed it again, has been paraded through the midst of an insolent populace." "Bah!" said the king, who began to be shaken. "Was it so managed?" "Monsieur de Treville," said the cardinal, with his greatest phlegm, "does not tell your majesty that this innocent musketeer, this gallant man, had only an hour before attacked, sword in hand, 4 commissaries of inquiry, who were delegated by myself to examine into an affair of the highest importance." "I defy your eminence to prove it," cried Treville, with his Gascon freedom and military frankness. For 1 hour before, Monsieur Athos, who, I will confide it to your majesty, is really a man of the highest quality, did me the honor, after having dined with me, to be conversing in the saloon of my hotel with the Duc de la Trémouille and the Comte de Châlus, who happened to be there. The king looked at the cardinal. A written examination attests it, said the cardinal, replying aloud to the mute interrogation of his majesty. And the ill-treated people have drawn up the following, which I have the honor to present to your majesty. And is the written report of the gownsman to be placed in comparison with the word of honor of a swordsman? Replied Tréville haughtily. Come, Tréville, hold your tongue, said the king. If his eminence entertains any suspicion against one of my musketeers, said Tréville, the justice of Monsieur the Cardinal is so well known that I demand an inquiry. In the house in which the judicial inquiry was made, continued the impassive cardinal, there lodges, I believe, a young Béarnais, a friend of the musketeer. Your eminence means Monsieur d'Artagnan. I mean a young man whom you patronize, Monsieur de Tréville. Yes, your eminence, it is the same. Do you not suspect this young man of having given bad counsel? To Athos? To a man double his age? Interrupted Tréville. No, Monseigneur. Besides, D'Artagnan passed the evening with me. Well, said the cardinal, everybody seems to have passed the evening with you. Does your eminence doubt my word? Said Tréville, with a brow flushed with anger. No, God forbid, said the cardinal. Only, at what hour was he with you? Oh, as to that, I can speak positively, your eminence, for as he came in I remarked that it was but 9:30 by the clock, although I had believed it to be later. At what hour did you leave your hotel? At 10:30, an hour after the event. Well, replied the cardinal, who could not for an instant suspect the loyalty of Tréville, and who felt that the victory was escaping him. Well, but Athos was taken in the house in the Rue des Fossoyeurs. Is one friend forbidden to visit another, or a musketeer of my company to fraternize with a guard of Dessart's company? Yes, when the house where he fraternizes is suspected. That house is suspected. Tréville, said the king, perhaps you did not know it. Indeed, sire, I did not. The house may be suspected, but I deny that it is so in the part of it inhabited by Monsieur d'Artagnan, for I can affirm, sire, if I can believe what he says, that there does not exist a more devoted servant of your majesty, or a more profound admirer of Monsieur the Cardinal. Was it not this D'Artagnan who wounded Jussac one day, in that unfortunate encounter which took place near the convent of the Carne des Chaussées? Asked the king, looking at the cardinal, who colored with vexation. And the next day? Bernajou. Yes, sire. Yes, it is the same, and your majesty has a good memory. Come, how shall we decide? Said the king. That concerns your majesty more than me, said the cardinal. I should affirm the culpability. And I deny it, said Tréville, but his majesty has judges, and these judges will decide. That is best, said the king. Send the case before the judges. It is their business to judge, and they shall judge. Only, replied Tréville, it is a sad thing that, in the unfortunate times in which we live, the purest life, the most incontestable virtue, cannot exempt a man from infamy and persecution. The army, I will answer for it, will be but little pleased at being exposed to rigorous treatment on account of police affairs. The expression was imprudent, but Monsieur de Tréville launched it with knowledge of his cause. He was desirous of an explosion, because in that case the mine throws forth fire, and the fire enlightens. Police affairs! Cried the king, taking up Tréville's words. Police affairs! And what do you know about them, monsieur? Meddle with your musketeers, and do not annoy me in this way. It appears, according to your account, that if by mischief a musketeer is arrested, France is in danger. What a noise about a musketeer! I would arrest 10 of them, ventrebleu, 100 even, all the company, and I would not allow a whisper. From the moment they are suspected by your majesty, said Tréville, the musketeers are guilty. Therefore, you see me prepared to surrender my sword, for after having accused my soldiers, there can be no doubt that Monsieur the Cardinal will end by accusing me. It is best to constitute myself at once a prisoner with Athos, who is already arrested, and with D'Artagnan, who most probably will be. Gascon-headed man, will you have done? Said the king. Sire, replied Tréville, without lowering his voice in the least, either order my musketeer to be restored to me, or let him be tried. He shall be tried, said the cardinal. Well, so much the better, for in that case I shall demand his majesty permission to plead for him. The king feared an outbreak. If his eminence, said he, did not have personal motives. The cardinal saw what the king was about to say and interrupted him. Pardon me, said he, but the instant your majesty considers me a prejudiced judge, I withdraw. Come, said the king, will you swear, by my father, that Athos was at your residence during the event, and that he took no part in it? By your glorious father, and by yourself, whom I love and venerate above all the world, I swear it. Be so kind as to reflect, sire, said the cardinal. If we release the prisoner thus, we shall never know the truth. Athos may always be found, replied Tréville, ready to answer when it shall please the gownsman to interrogate him. He will not desert, Monsieur the Cardinal. Be assured of that. I will answer for him. No, he will not desert, said the king. He can always be found, as Tréville says. Besides, added he, lowering his voice and looking with a suppliant air at the cardinal, let us give them apparent security. That is policy. This policy of Louis XIII made Richelieu smile. Order it as you please, sire. You possess the right of pardon. The right of pardoning only applies to the guilty, said Tréville, who is determined to have the last word, and my musketeer is innocent. It is not mercy, then, that you are about to accord, sire. It is justice. And he is in the Fort l'Evêque, said the king. Yes, sire, in solitary confinement, in a dungeon, like the lowest criminal. The devil! Murmured the king. What must be done? Sign an order for his release, and all will be said, replied the cardinal. I believe that your majesty, that Monsieur de Tréville's guarantee is more than sufficient. Tréville bowed very respectfully, with a joy that was not unmixed with fear. He would have preferred an obstinate resistance on the part of the cardinal to this sudden yielding. The king signed the order for release, and Tréville carried it away without delay. As he was about to leave the presence, the cardinal gave him a friendly smile and said, A perfect harmony reigns, sire, between the leaders and the soldiers of your musketeers, which must be profitable for the service and honorable to all. He will play me some dog's trick or other, and that immediately, said Tréville. One has never the last word with such a man. But let us be quick. The king may change his mind in an hour, and at all events it is more difficult to replace a man in the Fort l'Evêque or the Bastille who has got out than to keep a prisoner who is in. Monsieur de Tréville made his entrance triumphantly into the Fort l'Evêque, whence he delivered the musketeer, whose peaceful indifference had not for a moment abandoned him. The first time he saw D'Artagnan, "You have not come off well," said he to him. There is your Ussoc thrust paid for. There still remains that of Bernajoux, but you must not be too confident. As to the rest, Monsieur de Tréville had good reason to mistrust the cardinal, and to think that all was not over. For scarcely had the captain of the musketeers closed the door after him, than his eminence said to the king, "Now that we are at length by ourselves, we will, if your majesty pleases, converse seriously. Sire, Buckingham has been in Paris 5 days, and only left this morning." That brings us to the end of chapter 15. So we've had the freedom gained for Athos, but with a little less resistance than might have been expected. It seems the cardinal was eager to be free of Treville, so that he could further deepen and twist the intrigue that is enveloping the palace. Anything to sow suspicion against the queen. As has been said, he's a little predisposed against. So that was a fun couple chapters. A lot of back and forth, a lot of arguing, a lot of on-the-fly sort of banter between important people and unimportant people, if we go back a chapter thinking of Bernicy. Alright, let's go ahead and take a few minutes break. I need to top up my glass and wet the whistle. This has been a lot of dialogue very quickly. So we'll be back in just a few minutes when we will continue with Chapter 16. Thanks, guys. Be right back. Alright, we are back. Thank you for bearing with me. Alright, so let's see what further antics we will find our trio, quartet, etc. to get up to. Well, actually, they're all sort of spread throughout France at this point, honestly. So we'll see how many of them even come together, and we'll have a grand reunion of the Musketeers and some hopefully some insight given into the intrigue that's going on. Because things are definitely seeming to take on a scale that is much grander than our poor Gascon can manage. It's a very good day for gin and tonic. So, at least around here, it's rainy and stormy and gross, which I find that the worse the weather is outside, the better a day it is for gin. So, sorry, not sorry. All right. Let's jump back into it. Yeah, that does track very well with the English and gin. It's always gross and stormy and foggy, which, explains a lot. Explains a whole lot, actually. All right. So, we are nearing the quarter of the way through the bookmark, so we're actually making very good progress through this. I think the heavy dialogue chapters actually speed things up quite a bit. There's a little bit less on the page when it's dialogue, as opposed to dense paragraphs of exposition. And they're fun. Not only is there less on the page, but they go by faster. I tend to rush the pacing of dialogue and back and forth arguments and such. Tends to benefit from dramatic pacing. Alright, let's get into it then. We now have before us Chapter 16, in which Monsieur Seguier, Keeper of the Seals, looks more than once for the bell. It is impossible to form an idea of the impression these few words made upon Louis XIII. He grew pale and red alternately, and the cardinal saw at once that he had recovered by a single blow all the ground he had lost. "Buckingham, in Paris!" cried he. "And why does he come?" "To conspire, no doubt, with your enemies, the Huguenots and the Spaniards." "No, pardieu, no! To conspire against my honor with Madame de Chevreuse, Madame de Longueville, and the Condes." "Oh, sire, what an idea! The queen is too virtuous, and besides, loves your majesty too well." "Woman is weak, Monsieur Cardinal," said the king, "and as to loving me much, I have my own opinion as to that love." "I not the less maintain," said the cardinal, "that the Duke of Buckingham came to Paris for a project wholly political." "And I am sure that he came for quite another purpose, Monsieur Cardinal. But if the queen be guilty, let her tremble." "Indeed," said the cardinal, "whatever repugnance I may have to directing my mind to such a treason, your majesty compels me to think of it. Madame de Lannoy, whom, according to your majesty's command, I have frequently interrogated, told me this morning that the night before last, her majesty sat up very late, that this morning she wept much, and that she was writing all day." "That's it!" cried the king. "To him, no doubt, cardinal. I must have the queen's papers." "But how to take them, sire? It seems to me that it is neither your majesty nor myself who can charge himself with such a mission." "How did they act with regard to the Maréchal d'Ancre?" cried the king, in the highest state of choler. "First, her closets were thoroughly searched, and then she herself." "The Maréchal d'Ancre was no more than Maréchal d'Ancre, a Florentine adventurer, sire, and that was all, while the august spouse of your majesty is Anne of Austria, Queen of France, that is to say, one of the greatest princesses in the world." "She is not the less guilty, Monsieur Duke. The more she has forgotten the high position in which she is placed, the more degrading is her fall. Besides, I long ago determined to put an end to all these petty intrigues of policy and love. She has near her a certain Laporte, who, I believe, is the mainspring of all this, I confess," said the cardinal. "You think, then, as I do, that she deceives me?" said the king. I believe, and I repeat it to your majesty, that the queen conspires against the power of the king. But I have not said against his honor. And I tell you against both. I tell you the queen does not love me. I tell you she loves another. I tell you she loves that infamous Buckingham. Why did you not have him arrested while in Paris? Arrest the Duke. Arrest the Prime Minister of King Charles I. Think of it, sire. What a scandal! And if the suspicions of your majesty, which I continue to doubt, should prove to have any foundation, what a terrible disclosure! What a fearful scandal! But as he exposed himself like a vagabond or a thief, he should have been... Louis XIII stopped, terrified of what he was about to say, while Richelieu, stretching out his neck, waited uselessly for the word which had died on the lips of the king. He should have been... nothing, said the king, nothing. But all the time he was in Paris, you, of course, did not lose sight of him. No, sire. Where did he lodge? Rue de la Harpe, number 75. Where is that? By the side of the Luxembourg. And you are certain that the queen and he did not see each other? I believe the queen to have too high a sense of her duty, sire. But they have corresponded. It is to him that the queen has been writing all the day. Monsieur Duke, I must have those letters. Sire, notwithstanding, Monsieur Duke, at whatever price it may be, I will have them. I would, however, beg your majesty to observe. Do you, then, also join in betraying me, Monsieur Cardinal, by thus always opposing my will? Are you also in accord with Spain and England, with Madame de Chevreuse and the Queen? Sire, replied the Cardinal, sighing, I believed myself secure from such a suspicion. Monsieur Cardinal, you have heard me. I will have those letters. There is but one way. What is that? That would be to charge Monsieur de Seguier, the keeper of the seals, with this mission. The matter enters completely into the duties of the post. Let him be sent for instantly. He is most likely at my hotel. I requested him to call, and when I came to the Louvre, I left orders, if he came, to desire him to wait. Let him be sent for instantly. Your Majesty's orders shall be executed. But what? But the Queen will perhaps refuse to obey. My orders? Yes, if she is ignorant that these orders come from the King. Well, that she may have no doubt on that head, I will go and inform her myself. Your Majesty will not forget that I have done everything in my power to prevent a rupture. Yes, Duke, yes. I know you are very indulgent toward the Queen. Too indulgent, perhaps. We shall have occasion, I warn you, at some future period, to speak of that. Whenever it shall please your Majesty, but I shall be always happy and proud, sire, to sacrifice myself to the harmony which I desire to see reign between you and the Queen of France. Very well, Cardinal, very well. But meantime, send for Monsieur Keeper of the Seals. I will go to the Queen. It is very interesting to see how easily the king is manipulated on all sides. The Cardinal does it, and so the Musketeers do it. Everyone just seems to twist him in every which direction with not even a hard nudge, just a gentle suggestion. The man kind of goes any which way the wind points. And Louis XIII, opening the door of communication, passed into the corridor which led from his apartments to those of Anne of Austria. The Queen was in the midst of her women, Madame de Guitaut, Madame de Sable, Madame de Montbazon, and Madame de Guimet. In a corner was the Spanish companion, Donna Estefania, who had followed her from Madrid. Madame Guimet was reading aloud, and everybody was listening to her with attention, with the exception of the Queen, who had, on the contrary, desired this reading in order that she might be able, while feigning to listen, to pursue the thread of her own thoughts. These thoughts, gilded as they were by a last reflection of love, were not the less sad. Anne of Austria, deprived of the confidence of her husband, pursued by the hatred of the cardinal, who could not pardon her for having repulsed a more tender feeling, having before her eyes the example of the Queen Mother, whom that hatred had tormented all her life, though Marie de Medicis, if the memoirs of the time are to be believed, had begun by according to the cardinal that sentiment which Anne of Austria always refused him, Anne of Austria had seen her most devoted servants fall around her, her most infinite confidants, her dearest favorites. Like those unfortunate persons endowed with a fatal gift, she brought misfortune upon everything she touched. Her friendship was a fatal sign which called down persecution. Madame de Chevreuse and Madame de Bernay were exiled, and Laporte did not conceal from his mistress that he expected to be arrested every instant. It was at the moment when she was plunged in the deepest and darkest of these reflections that the door of the chamber opened, and the king entered. The reader hushed herself instantly. All the ladies rose, and there was a profound silence. As to the king, he made no demonstration of politeness, only stopping before the queen. "Madame," said he, "you are about to receive a visit from the chancellor, who will communicate certain matters to you with which I have charged him." The unfortunate queen, who was constantly threatened with divorce, exile, and trial even, turned pale under her rouge, and could not refrain from saying, "But why this visit, sire? What can the chancellor have to say to me that your majesty could not say yourself?" The king turned upon his heel without reply, and almost at the same instant the captain of the guards, Monsieur de Guiton, announced the visit of the chancellor. When the chancellor appeared, the king had already gone out by another door. The chancellor entered, half smiling, half blushing. As we shall probably meet with him again in the course of our history, it may be well for our readers to be made at once acquainted with him. This chancellor was a pleasant man. He was de Roche-le-Moselle, canon of Notre Dame, who had formerly been valet of a bishop, who introduced him to his eminence as a perfectly devout man. The cardinal trusted him, and therein found his advantage. There are many stories of him, and among them this. After a wild youth, he had retired into a convent, there to expiate, at least for some time, the follies of adolescence. On entering this holy place, the poor penitent was unable to shut the door so close as to prevent the passions he fled from entering with him. He was incessantly attacked by them, and the superior, to whom he had confided this misfortune, wishing as much as in him to free him from them, had advised him, in order to conjure away the tempting demon, to have recourse to the bell rope, and to ring with all his might. At the denunciating sound, the monks would be rendered aware that temptation was besieging a brother, and all the community would go to prayers. This advice appeared good to the future chancellor. He conjured the evil spirit with abundance of prayers offered up by the monks, but the devil does not suffer himself to be easily dispossessed from a place in which he has fixed his garrison. In proportion as they redoubled the exorcisms, he redoubled the temptations, so that day and night the bell was ringing full swing, announcing the extreme desire for mortification which the penitent experienced. The monks had no longer an instant of repose. By day they did nothing but ascend and descend the steps which led to the chapel. At night, in addition to complines and matins, they were further obliged to leap 20 times out of their beds and prostrate themselves on the floor of their cells. It is not known whether it was the devil who gave way, or the monks who grew tired, but within 3 months the penitent reappeared in the world, with the reputation of being the most terrible possessed that had ever existed. On leaving the convent, he entered into the magistracy, became president on the place of his uncle, embraced the cardinal's party, which did not prove want of sagacity, became chancellor, served his eminence with zeal in his hatred against the Queen Mother and his vengeance against Anne of Austria, stimulated the judges in the affair of Calais, encouraged the attempts of Monsieur de Laffemas, chief gamekeeper of France, then, at length, invested with the entire confidence of the cardinal, a confidence which he had so well earned, he received the singular commission for the execution of which he presented himself in the Queen's apartments. The queen was still standing when he entered, but scarcely had she perceived him, then she reseated herself in her armchair, and made a sign to her women to resume their cushions and stools, and with an air of supreme hauteur said, "What do you desire, monsieur? And with what object do you present yourself here?" "To make, madame, in the name of the king, and without prejudice to the respect which I have the honor to owe to your majesty, a close examination into all your papers." "How, monsieur, an investigation of my papers? Mine? Truly, this is an indignity." "Be kind enough to pardon me, madame, but in this circumstance I am but the instrument to which the king employs. Has not his majesty just left you, and has he not himself asked you to prepare for this visit?" "Search them, monsieur. I am a criminal, as it appears. Estefania, give up the keys of my drawers and my desks." For form's sake, the chancellor paid a visit to the pieces of furniture named, but he well knew that it was not in a piece of furniture that the queen would place the important letter she had written that day. When the chancellor had opened and shut 20 times the drawers of the secretaries, it became necessary, whatever hesitation he might experience, it became necessary, I say, to come to the conclusion of the affair. That is to say, to search the queen herself. The chancellor advanced, therefore, toward Anne of Austria, and said with a very perplexed and embarrassed air, "And now it remains for me to make the principal examination." "What is that?" asked the queen, who did not understand, or rather was not willing to understand. "His majesty is certain that a letter has been written by you during the day. He knows that it has not yet been sent to its address. This letter is not in your table, nor in your secretary, and yet this letter must be somewhere." "Would you dare to lift your hand to your queen?" said Anne of Austria, drawing herself up to her full height, and fixing her eyes upon the chancellor with an expression almost threatening. "I am a faithful subject of the queen, madame, and all that his majesty commands I shall do." "Well, it is true," said Anne of Austria, "and the spies of the cardinal have served him faithfully. I have written a letter today, and that letter is not yet gone. The letter is here." The queen laid her beautiful hand on her bosom. "Then give me that letter, madame," said the chancellor. "I will give it to none but the king, monsieur," said Anne. "If the king had desired that the letter should be given to him, madame, he would have demanded it of you himself. But I repeat to you, I am charged with reclaiming it. And if you do not give it up, well, he has then charged me to take it from you." "Ha! What do you say?" "That my orders go far, madame, and that I am authorized to seek for the suspected paper, even on the person of your majesty." "What horror!" cried the queen. "Be kind enough, then, madame, to act more compliantly." "The conduct is infamously violent. Do you know that, monsieur?" "The king commands it, madame. Excuse me." "I will not suffer it. No, no, I would rather die," cried the queen, in whom the imperious blood of Spain and Austria began to rise. The chancellor made a profound reverence. Then, with the intention quite patent of not drawing back a foot from the accomplishment of the commission with which he was charged, and, as the attendant of an executioner might have done in the chamber of torture, he approached Anne of Austria, from whose eyes at the same instant sprang tears of rage. The queen was, as we have said, of great beauty. The commission might well be called delicate, and the king had reached, in his jealousy of Buckingham, the point of not being jealous of anyone else. Without doubt, the Chancellor Seguier looked about at that moment for the rope of the famous bell, but not finding it, he summoned his resolution, and stretched forth his hand toward the place where the queen had acknowledged the paper was to be found. Anne of Austria took one step backward, became so pale that it might be said she was dying, and leaning with her left hand upon a table behind her to keep herself from falling, she, with her right hand, drew the paper from her bosom, and held it out to the keeper of the seals. "There, monsieur, there is that letter!" cried the queen, with a broken and trembling voice. "Take it, and deliver me from your odious presence." The chancellor, who, on his part, trembled with an emotion easily to be conceived, took the letter, bowed to the ground, and retired. The door was scarcely closed upon him when the queen sank, half fainting, into the arms of her women. The chancellor carried the letter to the king without having read a single word of it. The king took it with a trembling hand, looked for the address, which was wanting, became very pale, opened it slowly, then, seeing by the first words that it was addressed to the King of Spain, he read it rapidly. It was nothing but a plan of attack against the cardinal. The queen pressed her brother and Emperor of Austria to appear to be wounded, as they really were, by the policy of Richelieu, the eternal object of which was the abasement of the House of Austria, to declare war against France, and as condition of peace, to insist upon the dismissal of the cardinal. But as to love, there was not a single word about it in all the letter. The king, quite delighted, inquired if the cardinal was still at the Louvre. He was told that his eminence awaited the orders of his majesty in the business cabinet. The king went straight to him. "There, Duke," said he, "you were right and I was wrong. The whole intrigue is political, and there is not the least question of love in this letter. But on the other hand, there is abundant question of you." The cardinal took the letter and read it with the greatest attention. Then, when he arrived at the end of it, he read it a second time. "Well, your majesty," said he, "you see how far my enemies go. They menace you with 2 wars if you do not dismiss me. In your place, in truth, sire, I should yield to such powerful instance, and on my part, it would be a real happiness to withdraw from public affairs. What say you, Duke?" "I say, sire, that my health is sinking under these excessive struggles and these never-ending labors. I say that, according to all probability, I shall not be able to undergo the fatigues of the siege of La Rochelle, and that it would be far better that you should appoint there either Monsieur de Conde, Monsieur Bassompierre, or some other valiant gentleman, whose business is war, and not me, who am a churchman, and who am constantly turned aside for my real vocation to look after matters for which I have no aptitude. You would be the happier for it at home, sire, and I do not doubt you would be the greater for it abroad." "Monsieur Duke," said the king, "I understand you. Be satisfied. All who are named in that letter shall be punished as they deserve, even the queen herself." "What do you say, sire? God forbid that the queen should suffer the least inconvenience or uneasiness on my account. She has always believed me, sire, to be her enemy, although your majesty can bear witness that I have always taken her part warmly, even against you. Oh, if she betrayed your majesty on the side of your honor, it would be quite another thing, and I should be the first to say, 'No grace, sire, no grace for the guilty.' Happily, there is nothing of the kind, and your majesty has just acquired a new proof of it." "That is true, Monsieur Cardinal," said the king, "and you were right, as you always are. But the queen, not the less, deserves all my anger." "It is you, sire, who have now incurred hers, and even if she were to be seriously offended, I could well understand it. Your majesty has treated her with a severity." "It is thus I will always treat my enemies, and yours, Duke, however high they may be placed, and whatever peril I may incur in acting severely toward them. The queen is my enemy, but is not yours, sire. On the contrary, she is a devoted, submissive, and irreproachable wife. Allow me then, sire, to intercede for her with your majesty." "Let her humble herself, then, and come to me first." "On the contrary, sire, set the example. You have committed the first wrong, since it was you who suspected the queen." "What? I make the first advances," said the king. "Never!" "Sire, I entreat you to do so." "Besides, in what manner can I make advances first?" "By doing a thing which you know will be agreeable to her." "What is that?" "Give a ball." "You know how much the queen loves dancing. I will answer for it. Her resentment will not hold out against such an attention." "Monsieur Cardinal, you know that I do not like worldly pleasures." The Queen will only be the more grateful to you, as she knows your antipathy for that amusement. Besides, it will be an opportunity for her to wear those beautiful diamonds which you gave her recently on her birthday, and with which she has since had no occasion to adorn herself." "We shall see, Monsieur Cardinal, we shall see," said the king, who, in his joy at finding the Queen guilty of a crime which he cared little about, and innocent of a fault of which he had great dread, was ready to make up all differences with her. "We shall see, but upon my honor, you are too indulgent toward her." "Sire," said the cardinal, "leave the severity to your ministers. Clemency is a royal virtue. Employ it, and you will find that you derive advantage therein." Thereupon the cardinal, hearing the clock strike 11, bowed low, asking permission of the king to retire, and supplicating him to a good understanding with the queen. Anne of Austria, who, in consequence of the seizure of her letter, expected reproaches, was much astonished the next day to see the king make some attempts at reconciliation with her. Her first movement was repellent. Her womanly pride and her queenly dignity had both been so cruelly offended that she could not come round at the first advance. But, overpersuaded by the advice of her women, she at last had the appearance of beginning to forget. The king took advantage of this favorable moment to tell her that he had the intention of shortly giving a fete. A fete was so rare a thing for poor Anne of Austria that at this announcement, as the cardinal had predicted, the last trace of her resentment disappeared, if not from her heart, at least from her countenance. She asked upon what day this fete would take place, but the king replied that he must consult the cardinal upon that head. Indeed, every day the king asked the cardinal when this fete should take place, and every day the cardinal, under some pretext, deferred fixing it. 10 days passed away thus. On the 8th day, after the scene we have described, the cardinal received a letter with the London stamp, which only contained these lines: "I have them, but I am unable to leave London for want of money. Send me 500 pistoles, and 4 or 5 days after I have received them, I shall be in Paris." On the same day the cardinal received this letter, the king put his customary question to him. Richelieu counted on his fingers and said to himself, "She will arrive," she says, 4 or 5 days after having received the money. It will require 4 or 5 days for the transmission of the money, 4 or 5 days for her to return. That makes 10 days. Now, allowing for contrary winds, accidents, and a woman's weakness, there are 12 days. "Well, Monsieur Duke," said the king, "have you made your calculations?" "Yes, sire. Today is the 20th of September. The aldermen of the city give a fete on the 3rd of October. That will fall in wonderfully well. You will not appear to have gone out of your way to please the queen." Then the cardinal added, "A propos, sire, do not forget to tell her majesty the evening before the fete that you should like to see how her diamond studs become her." And that brings us to the end of chapter 16, wherein, yes, I think you're right, Dumas has certain opinions about royals. The king has been twisted about in the wind by every little influence, and the queen pressured to give up incriminating letters, but not the incrimination that we might have expected, not correspondence with the Duke of Buckingham. No, something to her family that is decidedly politically motivated. So, we'll see how things shake out. Whether the missing diamond studs will be found. Whether their missing should be noticed by the king. There's a lot of irons in the fire here, and the cardinal is twirling and spinning his yarn very skillfully. But I think it's probably about time for us to start seeing something of the Musketeers. It's been an entire night with very little presence of the trio, or the quartet. So we'll see if any of them will have a little bit more to say in the next chapter or so. Hopefully. We'll see. They are more fun and easier to get by than the manipulation of the king. It's not to say that manipulating the kings is not fun, but it's a little dry, really. I'm going to need more gin if this keeps up. Yeah, the Cardinal is a really great villain. He's spinning, he's a spider at the middle of a web. He's tweaking and twitching threads that are causing ripples and vibrations throughout, and manipulating the king and the others around him into the ends that he wants to see. And he doesn't really let on what his motives are. So he's really a very well-written villain. And not so, like, incalculable and inscrutable as you might worry about, or, like, not be able to understand. You kind of, you see the Cardinal and you see what he is. It's transparent, and you feel the hunger for power in him. But he doesn't let it on to the other characters super well. Or they see it, but don't care. It's just a well-written character and a great villain. Alright. We've got time in us for, well, the next chapter is about 11 pages. We probably can get through one more tonight. If we can get through it quickly, we'll see what the next chapter looks like, but this will probably take us about to the end of our time tonight. So, let's continue now with chapter 17. Bonacieux at home. It was the second time the Cardinal had mentioned these diamond studs to the king, Louis XIII. Louis XIII was struck with his insistence, and began to fancy that this recommendation concealed some mystery. More than once the king had been humiliated by the Cardinal, whose police, without having yet attained the perfection of the modern police, were excellent, being better informed than himself, even upon what was going on in his own household. He hoped then, in a conversation with Anne of Austria, to obtain some information from that conversation, and afterward to come upon his eminence with some secret, which the Cardinal either knew or did not know, but which in either case would raise him infinitely in the eyes of his minister. He went then to the Queen, and according to custom accosted her with fresh menaces against those who surrounded her. Anne of Austria lowered her head, allowed the torrent to flow on without replying, hoping that it would cease of itself. But this was not what Louis XIII meant. Louis XIII wanted a discussion from which some light or other might break, convinced as he was that the Cardinal had some afterthought, and was preparing for him one of those terrible surprises which his eminence was so skillful in getting up. He arrived at this end by his persistence in accusation. "But," cried Anne of Austria, tired of these vague attacks, "but, sire, you do not tell me all that you have in your heart. What have I done? Let me know what crime I have committed. It is improbable that your majesty can make all this ado about a letter written to my brother." The king, attacked in a manner so direct, did not know what to answer, and he thought that this was the moment for expressing the desire which he was not going to have made until the evening before the fete. "Madame," said he, with dignity, "there will shortly be a ball at the Hôtel de Ville. I wish, in order to honor our worthy alderman, you should appear in ceremonial costume, and above all, ornamented with the diamond studs which I gave you on your birthday. That is my answer." The answer was terrible. Anne of Austria believed that Louis XIII knew all, and that the Cardinal had persuaded him to employ this long dissimulation of 7 or 8 days, which, likewise, was characteristic. She became excessively pale, leaned her beautiful hand upon a console, which hand appeared then like one of wax, and looking at the king with terror in her eyes, she was unable to reply by a single syllable. "You hear, madame," said the king, who enjoyed the embarrassment to its full extent, but without guessing the cause. "You hear, madame." Yes, sire, I hear, stammered the queen. You will appear at this ball? Yes, with those studs? Yes. The queen's paleness, if possible, increased. The king perceived it and enjoyed it with that cold cruelty which was one of the worst sides of his character. Then that is agreed, said the king, and that is all I had to say of you. But on what day will this ball take place? Asked Anne of Austria. Louis XIII felt instinctively that he ought not reply to this question, the queen having put it in an almost dying voice. Oh, very shortly, madame, said he, but I do not precisely recollect the date of the day. I will ask the cardinal. It was the cardinal, then, who informed you of this fate? Yes, madame, replied the astonished king. But why do you ask that? It was he who told you to invite me to appear with these studs. That is to say, madame, it was he, sire, it was he! Well, and what does it signify whether it was he or I? Is there any crime in this request? No, sire. Then you will appear. Yes, sire. That is well, said the king, retiring. But that is well. I count upon it. The queen made a curtsy, less from etiquette than because her knees were sinking under her. The king went away and chanted. I am lost, murmured the queen. Lost! The cardinal knows all, and it is he who urges on the king, who as yet knows nothing, but will soon know everything. I am lost. My God, my God, my God! She knelt upon a cushion and prayed, with her head buried between her palpitating arms. In fact, her position was terrible. Buckingham had returned to London. Madame de Chevreuse was at Tours, more closely watched than ever. The queen felt certain, without knowing how to tell which, that one of her women had betrayed her. Laporte could not leave the Louvre. She had not a soul in the world in whom she could confide. Thus, while contemplating the misfortune which threatened her, and the abandonment in which she was left, she broke out into sobs and tears. Can I be of service to your majesty? Said all at once, a voice full of sweetness and pity. The queen turned sharply round, for there could be no deception in the expression of that voice. It was a friend who spoke thus. In fact, at one of the doors which opened into the queen's apartment appeared the pretty Madame Bonacieux. She had been engaged in arranging the dresses and linen in the closet when the king entered. She could not get out and had heard all. The queen uttered a piercing cry at finding herself surprised, for in her trouble she did not at first recognize the young woman who had been given to her by Laporte. Ah, fear nothing, madame, said the young woman, clasping her hands and weeping herself at the queen's sorrows. I am your majesty's body and soul. However far I may be from you, however inferior may be my position, I believe I have discovered a means of extricating your majesty from your trouble. You! Oh, heaven, you! Cried the queen. But look me in the face. I am betrayed on all sides. Can I trust in you? Oh, madame, cried the young woman, falling on her knees, upon my soul, I am ready to die for your majesty. This expression sprang from the very bottom of the heart, and like the first, there was no mistaking it. Yes, continued Madame Bonacieux, yes, there are traitors here, but by the holy name of the Virgin, I swear that no one is more devoted to your majesty than I am. Those studs which the king speaks of, you gave them to the Duke of Buckingham, did you not? Those studs were enclosed in a little rosewood box, which he held under his arm. Am I deceived? Is it not so, madame? Oh, my God, my God, my God, muttered the queen, whose teeth chattered with fright. Well, those studs, continued Madame Bonacieux, we must have them back again. Yes, without doubt it is necessary, cried the queen. But how am I to act? How can it be effected? Someone must be sent to the Duke. But who? Who? In whom can I trust? Place confidence in me, madame. Do me that honor, my queen, and I will be the messenger. But I must write, oh yes, that is indispensable, 2 words from the hand of your majesty and your private seal. But these 2 words would bring about my condemnation, divorce, exile. Yes, if they fell into infamous hands. But I will answer for these 2 words being delivered to their address. Oh my God! I must then place my life, my honor, my reputation in your hands? Yes, yes, madame, you must, and I will save them all. But how? Tell me at least the means. My husband has been at liberty these 2 or 3 days. I have not yet had time to see him again. He is a worthy, honest man who entertains neither love nor hatred for anybody. He will do anything I wish. He will set out upon receiving an order from me without knowing what he carries. And he will carry your majesty's letter without even knowing it is from your majesty to the address which is on it. The queen took the 2 hands of the young woman with a burst of emotion, gazed at her as if to read her very heart, and seeing nothing but sincerity in her beautiful eyes, embraced her tenderly. Do that, cried she, and you will have saved my life. You will have saved my honor. Do not exaggerate the service I have the happiness to render your majesty. I have nothing to save for your majesty. You are only the victim of perfidious plots. That is true, my child, said the queen. You are right. Give me then that letter. Madame, time presses. The queen ran to a little table, on which were ink, paper, and pens. She wrote 2 lines, sealed the letter with her private seal, and gave it to Madame Bonacieux. And now, said the queen, we are forgetting one very necessary thing. What is that, madame? Money. Madame Bonacieux blushed. Yes, that is true, said she, and I will confess to your majesty that my husband, your husband, has none. Is that what you would say? He has some, but he is very avaricious. That is his fault. Nevertheless, let not your majesty be uneasy. We will find means, and I have none either, said the queen. Those who have read the memoirs of Madame de Motteville will not be astonished at this reply. But wait a minute. Anne of Austria ran to her jewel case. Here, said she. Here is a ring of great value, as I have been assured. It came from my brother, the King of Spain. It is mine, and I am at liberty to dispose of it. Take this ring, raise money with it, and let your husband set out. In an hour you shall be obeyed. You see the address, said the queen, speaking so low that Madame Bonacieux could hardly hear what she said. To my Lord Duke of Buckingham, London. The letter shall be given to himself. Generous girl, cried Anne of Austria. Madame Bonacieux kissed the hands of the queen, concealed the paper in the bosom of her dress, and disappeared with the lightness of a bird. 10 minutes afterward, she was at home. As she told the queen, she had not seen her husband since his liberation. She was ignorant of the change that had taken place in him with respect to the cardinal, a change which had since been strengthened by 2 or 3 visits from the Comte de Rochefort, who had become the best friend of Bonacieux, and had persuaded him, without much trouble, that no culpable sentiments had prompted the abduction of his wife, but that it was only a political precaution. She found Monsieur Bonacieux alone. The poor man was recovering with difficulty the order in his house, in which he had found most of the furniture broken and the closets nearly emptied. Justice not being one of the 3 things which King Solomon names as leaving no traces of their passage. As to the servant, she had run away at the moment of her master's arrest. Terror had had such an effect upon the poor girl that she had never ceased walking from Paris till she reached Burgundy, her native place. The worthy mercer had, immediately upon re-entering his house, informed his wife of his happy return, and his wife had replied by congratulating him, and telling him that the first moment she could steal from her duties should be devoted to paying him a visit. This first moment had been delayed 5 days, which under any other circumstances might have appeared rather long to Monsieur Bonacieux. But he had, in the visit he had made to the cardinal, and in the visits to Rochefort, had made him ample subjects for reflection. And as everybody knows, nothing makes time pass more quickly than reflection. This was the more so because Bonacieux's reflections were all rose-colored. Rochefort called him his friend, his dear Bonacieux, and never ceased telling him that the cardinal had great respect for him. The mercer fancied himself already on the high road to honors and fortune. On her side, Madame Bonacieux had also reflected, but it must be admitted, upon something widely different from ambition. In spite of herself, her thoughts constantly reverted to that handsome young man who was so brave and appeared to be so much in love. Married at 18 to Monsieur Bonacieux, having always lived among her husband's friends, people little capable of inspiring any sentiment whatever in a young woman whose heart was above her position, Madame Bonacieux had remained insensible to vulgar seductions. But at this period, the title of gentleman had great influence with the citizen class, and D'Artagnan was a gentleman. Besides, he wore the uniform of the guards, which, next to that of the Musketeers, was most admired by the ladies. He was, we repeat, handsome, young, and bold. He spoke of love like a man who did love and was anxious to be loved in return. There was certainly enough in all this to turn a head only 23 years old, and Madame Bonacieux had just attained that happy period of life. The couple then, although they had not seen each other for 8 days, and during that time serious events had taken place in which both were concerned, accosted each other with a degree of preoccupation. Nevertheless, Bonacieux manifested real joy, and advanced toward his wife with open arms. Madame Bonacieux presented her cheek to him. "Let us talk a little," said she. "How?" said Bonacieux, astonished. "Yes, I have something of the highest importance to tell you." "True," said he, "and I have some questions sufficiently serious to put to you. Describe to me your abduction, I pray you." "Oh, that's of no consequence just now," said Madame Bonacieux. "And what does it concern, then? My captivity?" "I heard of it the day it happened, but as you were not guilty of any crime, as you were not guilty of any intrigue, as you, in short, knew nothing that could compromise yourself or anybody else, I attached no more importance to that event than it merited." "You speak very much at your ease, madame," said Bonacieux, hurt at the little interest his wife showed in him. "Do you know that I was plunged, during a day and a night, in a dungeon of the Bastille? Oh, a day and a night soon pass away. Let us return to the object that brings me here." "What? That which brings you home to me? Is it not the desire of seeing a husband again, from whom you have been separated for a week?" asked the mercer, piqued to the quick. "Yes, that first, and other things afterward." "Speak. It is a thing of the highest interest, and upon which our future fortune perhaps depends." "The complexion of our fortune has changed very much since I saw you, Madame Bonacieux, and I should not be astonished if in the course of a few months it were to excite the envy of many folks. Yes, particularly if you follow the instructions I am about to give you." "Me? Yes, you. There is good and holy action to be performed, monsieur, and much money to be gained at the same time." Madame Bonacieux knew that in talking of money to her husband, she took him on his weak side. But a man, were he even a mercer, when he talked for 10 minutes with Cardinal Richelieu, damn, getting a little tongue-tied here, is no longer the same man. "Much money to be gained," said Bonacieux, protruding his lip. "Yes, much. About how much?" "1,000 pistoles, perhaps." "What you demand of me is serious, then." "It is, indeed. What must be done?" You must go away immediately. I will give you a paper, which you must not part with on any account, and which you will deliver into the proper hands." "And whither am I to go?" "To London." "I go to London!" Go to? You jest! I have no business in London. But others wish that you should go there. But who are those others? I warn you that I never again work in the dark, and that I will know not only to what I expose myself, but for whom I expose myself. An illustrious person sends you, an illustrious person awaits you. The recompense will exceed your expectations. That is all I promise you. More intrigues, nothing but intrigues. Thank you, madame. I am aware of them now. Monsieur Cardinal has enlightened me on that head. The Cardinal, cried Madame Bonacieux. Have you seen the Cardinal? He sent for me, answered the mercer proudly. And you responded to his bidding. You imprudent man. Well, I can't say I had much choice of going or not going, for I was taken to him between two guards. It is true also that I did not then know his eminence. If I had been able to dispense with the visit, I should have been enchanted. He ill-treated you, then? He threatened you? He gave me his hand, and called me his friend. His friend! Do you hear that, madame? I am the friend of the great cardinal. Of the great cardinal. Perhaps you would contest his right to that title, madame? I would contest nothing, but I tell you that the favor of a minister is ephemeral, and that a man must be mad to attach himself to a minister. There are powers above his which do not depend upon a man or the issue of an event. It is to these powers we should rally. I am sorry for it, madame, but I acknowledge no other power but that of the great man whom I have the honor to serve. You serve the cardinal? Yes, madame, and as his servant, I will not allow you to be concerned in plots against the safety of the state, or to serve the intrigues of a woman who is not French and who has a Spanish heart. Fortunately, we have the great cardinal. His vigilant eye watches over and penetrates to the bottom of the heart. Bonacieux was repeating, word for word, a sentence which he had heard from the Comte de Rochefort. But the poor wife, who had reckoned on her husband, and who, in that hope, had answered for him to the queen, did not tremble the less. But at the danger into which she had nearly cast herself, and at the helpless state to which she was reduced, nevertheless, knowing the weakness of her husband, and more particularly his cupidity, she did not despair of bringing him round to her purpose. Ah, you are a cardinalist then, monsieur, are you? Cried she, and you serve the party of those who maltreat your wife and insult your queen? Private interests are as nothing before the interests of all. I am for those who serve the state, said Bonacieux emphatically. And what do you know about the state you talk of? Said Madame Bonacieux, shrugging her shoulders. Be satisfied with being a plain, straightforward citizen, and turn to that side which offers the most advantages. Hey, said Bonacieux, slapping a plump round bag which returned a sound of money. What do you think of this, Madame Preacher? Whence comes that money? You do not guess. From the cardinal, from him, and from my friend, the Comte de Rochefort. The Comte de Rochefort? Why, it is he who carried me off. That may be, madame, and you received silver from that man. Have you not said that the abduction was entirely political? Yes. But what abduction had for its object the betrayal of my mistress, to draw from me by torture confessions that might compromise the honor and perhaps the life of my august mistress? Madame, replied Bonacieux, your august mistress is a perfidious Spaniard. And what the cardinal does is well done. Monsieur, said the young woman, I know you to be cowardly, avaricious, and foolish, but I never till now believed you infamous. Madame, said Bonacieux, who had never seen his wife in a passion, and who recoiled before this conjugal anger, Madame, what do you say? I say you are a miserable creature, continued Madame Bonacieux, who saw she was regaining some little influence over her husband. You meddle with politics, do you? And still more with cardinalist politics? Why, you sell yourself, body and soul, to the demon, the devil, for money! No, to the cardinal. It's the same thing, cried the young woman. Who calls Richelieu calls Satan? Hold your tongue! Hold your tongue, madame! You may be overheard. Yes, you are right. I should be ashamed for anyone to know your baseness. But what do you require of me, then? Let us see. I have told you. You must depart instantly, monsieur. You must accomplish loyally the commission with which I deign to charge you. And on that condition, I pardon everything. I forget everything, and what is more, she held out her hand to him, I restore my love. Bonacieux was cowardly and avaricious, but he loved his wife. He was softened. A man of 50 cannot long bear malice with a wife of 23. Oh, hold up. 50 and 20... Yeah, this man is kind of... Yikes. Madame Bonacieux saw that he hesitated. Come, have you decided? Said she. I shouldn't be shocked. Given the time, gaps like that are a lot more common. But, yikes! Yikes! That's double the age! And then some. Yikes! But, my dear love, reflect a little upon what you require of me. London is far from Paris, very far, and perhaps the commission with which you charge me is not without dangers. What matters it if you avoid them? Hold, Madame Bonacieux, said the mercer. Hold! I positively refuse. Intrigues terrify me. I have seen the Bastille. Woohoo! That's a frightful place, that Bastille. Only to think of it makes my flesh crawl. They threatened me with torture. Do you know what torture is? Wooden points that they stick in between your legs till your bones stick out. No, positively I will not go. And morbleu! Why do you not go yourself? For, in truth, I think I have hitherto been deceived in you. I really believe you are a man, and a violent one, too. And you are a woman, a miserable woman, stupid and brutal. You are afraid, are you? What? If you do not go this very instant, I will have you arrested by the Queen's orders, and I will have you placed in the Bastille which you dread so much. Bonacieux fell into a profound reflection. He weighed the two angers in his brain, that of the cardinal and that of the Queen. That of the cardinal predominated enormously. Have me arrested on the part of the Queen, said he, and I will appeal to his eminence. At once, Madame Bonacieux saw that she had gone too far, and she was terrified at having communicated so much. She, for a moment, contemplated with fright that stupid countenance, impressed with the invincible resolution of a fool that is overcome by fear. Well, be it so, said she. Perhaps, when all is considered, you are right. In the long run, a man knows more about politics than a woman, particularly such as, like you, Monsieur Bonacieux, have conversed with the cardinal. And yet it is very hard, added she, that a man upon whose affection I thought I might depend treats me thus unkindly, and will not comply with any of my fancies. That is because your fancies go too far, replied the triumphant Bonacieux, and I mistrust them. Well, I will give it up then, said the young woman, sighing. It is well as it is. Say no more about it. At least, you should tell me what I should have to do in London, replied Bonacieux, who remembered a little too late that Rochefort had desired him to endeavor to obtain his wife's secrets. It is of no use for you to know anything about it, said the young woman, whom an instinctive mistrust now impelled to draw back. It was about one of those purchases that interest women, a purchase by which much might have been gained. But the more the young woman excused herself, the more important Bonacieux thought the secret which she declined to confide to him. He resolved then to hasten immediately to the residence of the Comte de Rochefort, and to tell him that the Queen was seeking for a messenger to send to London. Pardon me for quitting you, my dear Madame Bonacieux, said he, but, knowing you would come to see me, I had made an engagement with a friend, but not knowing. I shall soon return, and if you will wait only a few minutes for me, as soon as I have concluded my business with that friend, as it is growing late, I will come back and reconduct you to the Louvre. Thank you, monsieur. You are not brave enough to be of any use to me whatsoever, replied Madame Bonacieux. I shall return very safely to the Louvre all alone. As you please, Madame Bonacieux, said the ex-mercer. Shall I see you again soon? Next week. I hope my duties will afford me a little liberty, and I will take advantage of it to come and put things in order here, as they must necessarily be much deranged. Very well. I shall expect you. You are not angry with me? Not the least in the world. Till then, then? Till then. Bonacieux kissed his wife's hand, and set off at a quick pace. Well, said Madame Bonacieux, when her husband had shut the street door and she found herself alone, that imbecile lacked but one thing, to become a cardinalist. And I, who have answered for him to the Queen, I have promised my poor mistress. Oh, my God, my God! She will take me for one of those wretches with whom the palace swarms, and who are placed about her as spies. Oh, Monsieur Bonacieux, I never did love you much, but now it is worse than ever. I hate you, and on my word, you shall pay for this. At the moment she spoke those words, a rap on the ceiling made her raise her head, and a voice which reached through the ceiling cried, Dear Madame Bonacieux, open for me the little door on the alley, and I will come down to you. And that brings us to the end of Chapter 17. That was a fun chapter to narrate. The spousal domestic argument, such as it was a little heated there. I think I actually peeked my mic a few times if I was looking at the outputs. So, that's fun. But that was, we've had a, we've had some ups and downs through these last few chapters. And we finally hear from D'Artagnan right at the end there. But we are well over our time. And so we'll go ahead and wrap up here after a little bit of time to just decompress. But the conniving and working back between things, the characters, and the twisting of tales and schemes is really just tightening and winding itself around all of the characters. Everyone seems to be misstepping all over the place. Between both Bonacieux, between Tréville, between the Cardinal, between the King and the Queen, everyone seems to be getting a foot in it. And yeah, I love the dialogue and the banter in this book. It's very natural, really. But also, it's got, like, ironic twists. You can see as the characters are making their missteps and as they're arguing and finding themselves like, oh, I just put my foot in it, didn't I? So, it's a lot of fun there. And the pacing is really well done. And I think a lot of that can actually be lost if you're reading to yourself quietly. The narration style like this is a lot more animated in that case, and it makes you really feel the characters come alive. So I'm enjoying this. I didn't really think that it would be such a good fit for our format, but it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I'm enjoying this book a lot. I'm glad we're coming to it when we have, though. If we'd done it a little bit earlier in the channel, I don't think I would have been quite up to the task. Not only the French, because as has been mentioned, my French is much improved. It was absolutely heinous before. But I think it's come off a little bit better as I've gained confidence as we've gone. And being able to be so animated and more forthcoming in some of these, it helps a lot. And I'm just glad we're doing it now. It's a lot of fun. And it is really wonderful to know that there's so much more Dumas to pull from. We've got a lot of authors that we need to revisit and a lot of stories to continue. So it's not like we have any lack of content. It's one of the best parts about the format that we take, going from public domain works. There are thousands of books, and when we find authors and series that we fall in love with like this, it's all the better that there's more to pull from. Exactly, like the Sherlock Holmes stories. We loved doing those, and there are so many of them to go through. And so between Sherlock Holmes and we need to revisit Alice in Wonderland, we had a lot of fun with Alice when we were, especially at the court scene. We had fun with. So we've got a lot to revisit and have fun with. So we'll recycle and go through things. And then there's other things that we haven't gotten to yet that I am positive that we're going to enjoy. We just need to wait for the right season. So, all right. I have been talking for 2 hours running, and as you might understand, I'm about to run myself dry. So, let's go ahead and call it a night for now. Our next reading is scheduled for Tuesday. We will follow our schedule. So far, we've been pretty good about that. I think we've only missed when I had some family emergencies come up. So, we can stick to these as if religious. So, our next reading will be on Tuesday, at our normal time, where we will continue with the Three Musketeers. We are now just north of 25% of the way through the book, so we can kind of look forward to the pacing. It's been, what, 4 days? 4 days. So, yeah, this will probably mean we'll have about 15 or 16 sessions total for Three Musketeers, which about tracks with where we were when we read Verne, when we were just getting started. So this is going to be one of our longer series, but that's not really a problem. I feel like we pick up a lot of random passersby when we do the short stories, especially when we do things like Lovecraft. But for consistency's sake, we're all enjoying these long books. And so the core audience are fine with this, and I'm fine with this. So we'll just continue having fun with Dumas and the Three Musketeers. This one is a lot of fun to read. And so with that, on that high note, let's go ahead and call it an evening. Thank you very much for joining us. If you have not yet, I encourage you to drop a like on the stream, so we can spread the word of the good things we're doing here. All right, have a wonderful night. Thank you for joining us, and till next time. Bye now. And yes, Simba is upside down.